Thank you, Carlos. It's quite delightful to be here in Eduardo's school because I got to know Eduardo this summer, and I have a sense of what a good school now he runs, and what a beautiful school it is, what a wonderful setting. It would help me to know how many of you are teachers, how many of you are parents, how many of you are simply community members who are interested. So would the teachers raise their hands? Lots of teachers, okay. What about parents? Okay. Any people who are here from the community who no longer have children in school? Very good. Okay. One thing before I start, because you may be wondering why somebody whose name is Mery Diez does not speak Spanish. My great-grandfather actually came from Germany to the United States in 1880. And in German, this same name, the vowels have just one sound, as in Frida, E, and the Z has two sounds, because like Mozart, you get a free T when you have a Z. So the name is really Dietz. But everybody's been calling me Mery Diez, and it's very lovely, so I just accept it. As Carlos pointed out, I work with a team of people who run... Carlos, what did I say? Oh, okay, sorry, I heard something. I thought I said your name wrong, I'm sorry. Who run the Leadership Academy for Character Education. We're working with our third cohort. It's a year-long program where teams of teachers come together to look seriously at the kinds of questions we're going to be talking about this evening. And it really is a way for schools, I think, to take a step back and say, are we meeting the expectations of the really significant responsibility we have, not only to teach knowledge and skills to students, but to develop them as people. The elements of character education, and it goes by different names, are showing on the screen. One area is social and emotional learning. We know that many young people have a difficult time growing up, and they need to learn such things as how to have empathy for other people, or how to manage their anger, or how to behave in a civil way. And so character education provides one opportunity for that. We ordinarily divide character into two kinds of character. One is the personal, where you're looking at the moral values that we want our children to develop. And in Catholic schools, of course, that's part of the Catholic heritage that we're interested in. But things like compassion and fairness and responsibility. And as I'll talk about it, one of the things we've discovered is if you don't ever say anything about those characteristics, if you don't talk about them, it's very hard for students to begin to think about them. So the obligation is really to make more explicit what the expectations are and provide assistance and practice in the development. The other aspect does relate to the academic, and it's called performance character. We're really looking to help schools work with their students to take responsibility for doing good work, for not saying, I'll just get by, but to develop kind of a code of honor about doing their best work. I want you to do a little thought experiment. We won't gather the ideas until later, but think about your school, either the school at which you teach or the school where your children attend. What would you like to hear when people talk about the school that you're connected to? What would you like people to say about the behavior of the children in your school? I know there are some schools that feel very badly because the community around them is afraid of their children. What about the academic excellence of your graduates? What kind of reputation would you like for your school? And very importantly, what would you like people to say about the moral character of your students? If they say, for instance, at San Juan el Precursor, how do you say it in Spanish, el Precursor? What are the boys like? Can you trust them? Are they honest? Those kinds of questions. Now, in the United States, and it's available really to anyone who can get on the internet, we have a group called the Character Education Partnership that's a national group. And in my state of Wisconsin, we also have a Wisconsin character organization that's affiliated with that group. They really have lots of resources on these issues. So I put the two websites on the PowerPoint, and I'm sure Eduardo's going to make it available to anyone who wants it. But they provide a good number of tools and strategies, and they share best practice from various institutions. In fact, they have a competition each year for National Schools of Character or State Schools of Character, where the school submits a description of what its work has been against a set of criteria, and they may be awarded the name School of Character, or they may be given a recognition for a promising practice. And I was telling Eduardo earlier this afternoon, there should be an international School of Character, and he could apply. One of the things that I think is very useful, and will organize what I'll talk about tonight, are the 11 principles of character education that the Character Education Partnership provides. It's really a framework that helps all those involved, the teachers, the administrators, the parents, and the students, have a sense of what you need to do, what you need to look at in order to examine your school, to see what you've been doing, what you could do better, how you can move forward to have a school that really takes the responsibility for the whole child. So the first set of these principles are really all around the school having a design for doing character education. The first principle says that the school community promotes core ethical and performance values as the foundation of good character. It would be an interesting test as well if you could say, do you know what the core values of your school are? Do people talk about those core values? Are they clear to the students and the parents as well as the community? In one of the schools that we have, actually a whole district, which is 5 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school in a suburb of Milwaukee. The district has been working together on this project, and one of the ways they involved the whole community was to have a list of values that the parents, when they came for the first conference of the year, the parents could vote for those they thought were the most important values. The teachers thought they knew which ones they would be, and they were right about the first 3. But the 4th one was a little different than they expected. The point was, the parents agreed with them, and they would not have known that if they hadn't polled the parents and asked them to give their input about those values. The things that came up were trust, respect, and responsibility as the first ones. And then I think the 4th was honesty. But it gave them a common sense of what was important to them, what they wanted to make sure they instilled in all the action of their school. Principle 2 talks about the importance of looking at the whole person. The school defines character comprehensively to include thinking, feeling, and doing. In the thinking realm, students have to study and discuss the meaning of the core values that the school has chosen. They need to use those values to solve problems. They need to work to develop those skills I talked about before of empathy, of forming caring relationships with each other, with their parents, helping to create the community, reflecting on their life experiences. And then they need to work on some of the skills that flow from that. How do they practice the behaviors of being able to talk out a problem rather than using their fists, for example? Building relationships across grade levels so that they see themselves not as bullying younger children, but as being role models and supporters for the younger children. The third principle is that the school uses a comprehensive, intentional, and proactive approach to character development. One of the things I like to say to the teachers as we work with them is that even if you never said anything at all, you'd be teaching some form of character, because the way you act communicates what you believe in. And if, for instance, you don't show respect for students, you're communicating that you don't respect them. And that's a surefire way to have a problem community, to have students who give you disrespect back. Then it becomes a downward spiral of bad behavior. We often talk in education about the hidden curriculum. And the hidden curriculum is all the things we do that the students take in and learn from that we don't intend. So it's important that we think about our action as teachers, surely as parents. You have heard the old saw, don't do as I do as I say. That never works. They always look at your example and say, okay, then I can do that too. It's also important in the academic curriculum that we reinforce the values, that we look at responsibility not just in behavior and decorum, but also in, am I doing my best work? Am I developing my skills, my God-given skills, so that I'm taking responsibility for being a full person? And then through extracurricular activities. I know in countries that play soccer, sometimes there's not very good behavior when people lose, when their teams lose. We do that too with our football. But how do we establish respect and good sportsmanship and really model that for the students? And then the fourth principle, the school creates a caring community. In many ways, if we do things right in school, we're preparing a better society in the next years when those children leave us. Because school ought to be a place where they practice what a civil society looks like, where they learn to be members of a community. The community really needs to help everyone form caring relationships, students with each other so that they're looking after each other, the staff and the teachers with the students, and the staff and the families. So how do we consciously build relationships? In our schools, I'm afraid sometimes the teachers build walls and don't want to let the parents in because it's easier to just run the school. But it's very, very important to have the families involved because the parents are the first educator of the child. And the cooperation between the two can be very, very important. It really is within caring relationships that we foster both the desire to learn, to be academically strong, to learn skills, to develop knowledge, and also develop the desire to be a good person, to have a sense of what it means to be someone who can be trusted, someone who cares for others. So I'd like you to take just 30 seconds in your head and ask yourself, do any of these ideas resonate with your own issues or problems that you're grappling with at your school, or with your sense of what you would like school to be? So I'm going to give you just a little reflection time. The next set of principles, as a group, deals with how schools work with their students and model what they want students to see and become. Principle 5 says the school provides students with opportunities for moral action. I'm thinking that in many ways, a Catholic school has an opportunity to do this that is sometimes not taken on by public schools in my country, in my community. For example, in religious studies or theology courses, Catholic schools can often raise dilemmas and ask students to talk about them in relation to the principles they're talking about. And sometimes, at least our public schools, find it hard to do that. I think you can do it in public school, but it's often limited to looking at problems in the civic arena rather than problems that might be more of a personal nature of morality, for example. But in any school, students can really learn to take opportunities to say, in this situation, how do I show compassion for another student? If you see a student who's troubled by something, do you tease that student, or do you ask that student how you might be helpful? Do you give that student a little space when they need it? How do you learn to be fair with other students and give others opportunities to try things out? I'm thinking about basketball players who, in our terminology, hog the ball, that is, won't pass the ball to anyone else. You have to develop the whole team if you're going to have a good sports team, whatever the game may be. I think any school can find real-life challenges to use as opportunities for learning. For example, if you assign group tasks and really help the group learn how to divide up the work so that everyone does his or her fair share. If you work with students to learn how to listen to each other so that in solving a problem they can come to a consensus, or at least have a respectful argument about what the different positions might be. In many of our schools, there's a great focus on what is called service learning. That is the identification of projects that take you out into the community to help work with some issue. It might be an environmental cleanup issue. It might be moving some question forward to get the attention of the civic authorities. I know of one school where there was a very dangerous crossing, and the students worked to get one of those overhead sidewalks rather than to have students go in the traffic. They took that responsibility. And the important thing about service learning is when you come to the end of the project, the learning happens through reflection. Otherwise, it's just service. You want to have the learning piece where they say, why were we successful? How could we have been more successful? What skills would we develop that we can use in another setting? Those kinds of questions. But overall, we want students to develop both the practical understanding of problems and also that understanding of how do I work with others to make something happen. So that opportunity for moral action is both taking the opportunity and then reflecting on how it is moral. In Principle 6, the school offers a meaningful and challenging academic curriculum that respects all learners, develops their character, and helps them to succeed. This is really the responsibility, I think, of the teachers to say, how do we engage students in something that is meaningful and interesting to them? And that often means offering them choices. There are many ways you can learn something. And in the past, we've always had everybody do it the same way at the same time, but we didn't always get the same results. If we can identify the skills we're working at and give options and choices, we're more likely to have a strong academic response from all of the students. We also need to look at how active our practice is with our students. Again, I think today, students are eager to see how things work, and they can go and read the background information. So our classrooms ought to be more organized around active learning, problem solving, creating experiences that makes the knowledge really become concrete. And in that way, we are respecting learners and putting them in a position to be able to do something with what they know. If you saw Eduardo's piece of paper, if all you do is hear the information and give it back, 2 weeks from now you won't remember it. But if you learn the information and have to make some kind of application and reflect on that application, you're more likely to carry that with you as you move through the rest of your life. Principle 7 is a particularly important one in my view, and that is that the school fosters student self-motivation. Too many times in our schools, and you can think about whether this is true in yours, we try to motivate students through rewards and punishments that are external. But the real goal is to have the student find their motivation within themselves, to have it be meaningful. So while students have to develop their understanding of the rules of society and why it's a good idea to follow those rules, for instance, if we didn't have rules for the road when you were driving, we'd have an even more chaotic scene than we have. Students need to be aware of how their behavior affects others so that they make choices about their behavior out of their own interests, but also about the compassion and the empathy that they have for others. They need to learn self-control and perspective-taking and conflict resolution, all of which go much beyond just compliance that gets rewarded or punished. So having students really think about problem solving, restitution when they have harmed someone, reflecting on their actions and how they impact others. Again, I think that's fully part of the Christian tradition, but it's also a strong character tradition that we look at. A number of the schools that we work with use a process called restorative discipline, so that when students get into some kind of trouble where they have hurt someone else, instead of moving immediately to punishment, they form a circle and the student has to face the person they've hurt, has to listen to how that person says they felt, and then has to talk with the person about how they can restore the justice and peace. It's very powerful. And it really makes them think the next time that they're taking some kind of action. Principle 8. This one, again, goes back to that we must model or the students won't believe us. The school staff is an ethical learning community that shares responsibility for character education and adheres to the same core values that guide the student. If I say to you, you must be honest, but then you see me not being honest, why should you follow what I say? So all of the staff need to be involved, and all of the staff need to model the same values. And that may require some reflection, some thinking together by the staff to say, how do we communicate to students that we value what we're asking them to do, that we demonstrate what we ask them to do. So again, take maybe 30 seconds and think about what's important in these ideas as you think about your relationship to your school. The last 3 of the principles are really about how the school works together, how it maintains its focus on character education and on the development of its students as whole people. Principle 9 is that the school fosters shared leadership and long-range support of the character education initiative. In our experience, you don't have a solid character education focus in a school unless the leader is on board with it. It can't be just the leader, but the leader has to be the chief model of this effort. And there has to be a way of saying we're in this for the long haul. We're not just doing it for a year. It's really how we do things, transforming what we do to a way of doing it that reflects the core values we've identified and reflects the kind of people that we want to develop as a result of their attending our school. Principle 10, the school engages families and community members as partners in the character building element. If there's one thing I could change about schools around the world, it would be that parents would be more active. The parents would really be supporters and would see the teachers and the teachers see them as co-workers to make the world a better place through their children. So family engagement and ownership is very important. And here many schools hold activities where the students may have been working on some aspect of character education, perhaps through a service learning project, and they invite the parents to come and have a conversation about what they learned. That's one way to bring the parents in. Another is, as I described in the suburb of South Milwaukee, to invite the parents from the very beginning to help shape the effort. But it is a common effort because parents really, as the first teachers of their children, instill those very, very early values that you see with the little ones. And so they need to stay connected with the job and the role. And that requires communication in both directions. I think schools need to be more welcoming to have parents come, and parents need to be readier perhaps to share their time or to find ways to connect with the school. And again, the wider community can become part of this. There are a number of cities in Milwaukee cities in Wisconsin, rather, the state, that have become communities of character. It's extended beyond the school to having businesses talk about the same character values and find ways to support across those areas. And that becomes then a very rich environment for students to develop themselves as whole people. And then 11, the school regularly assesses its culture and climate, the functioning of its staff as character educators, and the extent to which its students manifest good character. If you want to know if you're doing something well, you really need to step back, take a look, and engage in some evaluation of that. Look for the evidence. What evidence is there that you're doing what you said you wanted to do? So the evaluation can focus on the character of the school. How do we see our students behaving? Are they modeling what it is we talk about? Are they able to express why it's important to them and how they have made decisions? What about the staff's growth as character educators? Part of the evaluation can be, have we provided support for them? And part of it can be, what do we see them doing? And then the student character as well. One major issue with character education is seeing it as something that we just add on. We have our regular school, and we bring this in and we add it on. And that's the wrong way to think about it. We talk, and I'm sure you have this metaphor too, about having a lot on our plate and putting one more thing on our plate. And the character education byline is, it's not another thing on the plate, it is the plate. So it's the basis for all that we do. It's really the central mission that we have as educators, to develop children who will grow into adults that we can be proud of, that will really model the values that we have talked about together and instilled in them as a school, as a community. So again, I'd like you to think about how these ideas resonate, and after we have some commentary by Eduardo and Amelia, I hope we'll have a lively discussion about how you see these issues. Thank you.